On Rumble.
All right, guys, welcome back to a special episode of the Opposition Podcast. It's Rukshan coming to you from the studio in Melbourne, and I'm joined by co-host Avi Yemini from Israel, who's just walked off on me. Hopefully he comes back in a second. Yep. Just give me 1 second, guys. Technical issues, of course, with this kind of broadcast. But look, today we're going to be speaking to Avi about the work that he's doing in Israel, the reporting that he's doing, obviously the situation there as well, and putting a lot of questions that the public, particularly in Australia, has been putting to Avi and myself in a roundabout way in some of the stories that have been shared and some of the posts that I've shared as well. So really want to address some of these things. I know people have a lot of different questions for Avi, but first up, Avi, welcome to the show from Israel.
Thanks, mate. We're just double checking that the Rumble one is running well.
Okay, I can wait. We can wait till it's all
just wait
working.
1 second because I know we have a large audience there, and
yeah,
is it
we'll
coming
make sure
up?
the Rumble's running first.
I don't need to see it. Okay. So you just keep an eye on that. Yeah, it's running. All right,
it's running.
I'm with you. Thanks, Rukshan, for doing this, organising this. I think.
Honestly, I thought it would be a good idea to do this because we were going to postpone the show while you were there. I know you joined in last week for the referendum special that we did, but we were going to postpone it because obviously you're doing all types of work there, and it's a bit hard to kind of catch the time zones together and make it all work. So thanks for coming on. And first up, before we kind of get into this, how many days you been there now, and where are you currently, and what's the kind of situation in the ground there where you are?
Yeah, so we are. What day is it today? Even is it Thursday? It's
It's
Thursday night. Yeah,
Thursday,
so
yeah, yeah.
Thursday. So we've been here. This is our 8th day on the ground. We got here last Wednesday. We're based in Ashkelon, which is probably the closest large town to Gaza on the Israeli side. Here, there's constant rocket attacks. I'd say most people have left this area. That's why, like things like even Airbnbs, which we're staying at, you have to agree to go into a dirty one because they can't get cleaners around here into the house. I know that's a little problem, but it just kind of demonstrates kind of life in this part of Israel, all across the southern border, and this is just like the main city down south, closest to the Gaza border. In fact, we tried to stay even closer at somewhere like Sderot, but you can't even get Airbnbs there. So it's about to get to the Gaza border is about 20-minute drive. And the on the ground at the moment here is they're just waiting for the ground incursion, and while at the same time the north is flaring up. So you got Hezbollah in the north that are targeting at the moment just Israeli troops, and Israel's firing back. I think that's probably going to escalate when the ground incursion. That's just my hunch, not any. Just historically, that's what's happened. So Hezbollah tried to seize the opportunity, thinking that Israeli forces are preoccupied, and they'll going for a full scale attack. At that point, right now, it's just it's rockets. Their rockets are a fair bit more powerful and sophisticated than the Hamas rockets, but they're based in southern Lebanon. They've got an entire country to use to basically arm themselves for, since it was 2005, the last time Israel was in there. So you're talking about almost 20 years. It was when I was in the army. So, and then the West Bank is another part of Israel. People don't really know the map of Israel. I can see, I can tell from the comments, people don't actually often understand the geography of Israel and the Palestinian territories. They probably can't even, a lot of these people that have the biggest opinions, like I just saw Spanion's video, I bet you he couldn't even point to Israel on a map, and he's, a Christian. So for him, he should be able to point it out pretty well.
Mm.
But they spew all the same ignorant talking points that I can see they've never been here, or they don't actually really understand what's happening, because it's not from a position of certainly not one of witnessing, because they haven't seen anything on the ground, but it's one that you can see has just come from the average, the main talking points, and these talking points have been around for a very long time, and they're hard to fight, only because if you think about it, I find it funny that so many of these people that through COVID were fighting against the narrative and blah blah blah, and then on the Israel issue they just jumped on the narrative, and they claim that I'm jumping on the narrative.
Well, I want to actually challenge you on some of this stuff,
Yeah,
definitely, because
yeah, let's go.
I've been monitoring a lot of the comments around this, and I feel like we're so kind of deep into all of this now, even though this kind of flared up maybe a week and a half ago, and there's been so many ebbs and flows, so many changes in terms of how this story is covered and the situation on the ground, both in Israel, and now we're seeing some of the effects of this in Gaza as well. And you know, I think if I take it back to when I first talked to you about this particular incident, I think you messaged me. I was at an event, and you just said, look what's happening. Or maybe I messaged you by seeing something online, and I think the world kind of reacted to that footage that was coming out of Israel, from the border, where you had these Hamas terrorists who have gone across the border, and there was an incursion into multiple towns, and we've all seen the footage now, and it feels like that's in the distant past almost. That's just how fast all of this has moved. And I remember talking to you then, and you were obviously worried about what was happening in Israel. But I didn't really get a sense that potentially that you'd be going there to cover this story. And a couple of days later, you told me, I got to go cover this. I got to go cover this story of what's happening. And I really want to take it to that because obviously a lot of people introduced you more so during the time of lockdown and coverage and COVID coverage here in Melbourne, Victoria, especially. And they might not be aware of your past. They might not be aware of your background. Obviously, people that follow you very closely are aware of this. But, what compelled you, I guess, to leave Australia and go do this type of coverage? Because when I was speaking to you, I got the sense that even though you really wanted to go, there was, you were not in two minds about it, but you knew there was something at stake in terms of covering this type of issue. Is that a good way of
Mm.
putting this?
Yeah, for sure. Listen, when I watched, like everyone, in shock and horror at what happened um, on Saturday last weekend, where the terrorists infiltrated into Israel, breached the fence, came over on paragliders. They did a multi-level kind of attack, which from their perspective was super successful. Now, you can gauge the success because that was the biggest hit Israel has ever taken since even before even the Yom Kippur War. It was a surprise attack on the Yom Kippur War, which was 50 years earlier, but it didn't have the savagery and the effect that this one had. And it's a thing. I know this is the talking point from the other side, but it actually is the single deadliest day for Jews around the world, and I don't think this just affected people in Israel. I know the whole Jewish community around the world were watching, and this is even in the early stages when we were just watching the footage. And many of us saw what was happening before Israelis even realized what was happening because it was a Jewish holiday, and it was a Sabbath here, and so. And because it was like 6:30 a.m., most of them were just getting up, and I was the one that kind of broke the news to my brother from my lounge room in Melbourne because I was glued to Twitter or X, watching it myself on the phone, and I was just like telling him what's going on, and he would turn on the news, and you couldn't even see it on the news in Israel yet because again, it was the holy. It's like a celebration day, a holy day, so the newsrooms were empty. There was no one really working. They were running pre-records. So like in the beginning, I didn't. I was honestly, I was probably just in shock at what I was viewing. I couldn't believe it. We literally had ISIS-style terrorists, marching Israeli communities and gunning people down and taking hostages. That's what we could see at that point. We didn't know the severity or
Hmm.
the level of barbaric. The stories. I interviewed a couple of victims already. That we haven't even put out yet, but just insane kind of stuff, vile stuff. And I, like everyone, I was shocked by it. And you saw many people, even people that do not align with Israel at all, ever coming out in disgust. Because I think if you have a human heart and you watch and you witness what happened, your first response would be, "Oh my God, that is the most disgusting, vile attack,"
Yeah. Well,
and
look, I
it's
mean,
all being.
I'm looking at this as an outsider watching this, particularly through a platform like Twitter, and it's quite confronting seeing those type of scenes, particularly someone who is living in a free country like Australia, and we kind of enjoy this type of peace, and then seeing that kind of terrorism taking place wherever it happens in the world. Of
Yeah,
course, it impacts us when we're looking at that type of footage because typically, you don't see it so. We had scenes of these groups themselves live streaming some of this footage, so it's very different to
yeah,
seeing, for instance, something like 9/11 even, or some
yeah.
of these type of other attacks where you see the aftermath of a bombing. You're kind of seeing this very,
Player.
it's playing out in front of you. These things are happening. Hostages are being taken. Attacks are happening. You know there's death. You know they're suffering, like it's happening in front of you. So I think for many of us in Australia who are perhaps not connected to this in the same way the Jewish community is, we're also
Yeah,
seeing this. And I know like the reaction in this country after that, and of course around the world as well, but even the reaction in Australia was dismay, was disappointment that this is the world that we live in, and it's
yeah,
shocking the things that we were seeing. And even following that, a couple of days later, we kind of started seeing who these people were, who these families were. Who were the people that were killed, who were the people that were taken, and yes, it's families just like here in Australia. It's people just like our families, our friends, our kids. So we're seeing these scenes as it's playing out. So this is in the very early stages, and there is a lot of outrage about this. I mean, I'm monitoring the discussions around this online and from politicians, and there is outrage about what is happening, because I think more so than a an attack on a military, which some people
yeah,
might not be so impacted by in a way if they're not linked to that country. Like, of course, if Australian soldiers got ambushed in Afghanistan or something, we would maybe feel a connection to it. But for us, we get that human connection of seeing people suffering. So I think it did obviously get a lot of attention in Australia, and we had
yeah.
politicians obviously lighting up buildings and all this kind of stuff that typically happens these days during these type of attacks. But since that time, I think it's almost that story has been put aside.
Well,
Um,
that's what I said to you. I don't know if you remember when you just were mentioning how I went from watching it to deciding I'm going to go. I said to you, I said to my wife, I said, I know what's going to happen because everyone's coming out in support of Israel, even people that generally do not support Israel and call Israel all sorts of names
mm,
that I believe are absolutely unjustified. So and some people were playing mental gymnastics. You had like Ilan Omar and these Rashid Talib, though, or I don't know if Rashid to be honest, but Ilan Omar, was condemning the attack on one hand, which was the first time you've seen her ever condemn something just because it was so horrific and you can't justify it.
yeah.
The only other people not justifying were people denying that it's happening. Like, oh, they're all actors. But even she then goes back to the old narrative of you're the victim blaming. You basically brought this upon yourself. Now, what I told you at the time was, I can see right now, yes, everyone's in support because you cannot, if you have a heart, you cannot not, you can't stand for the people that are being butchered, raped, kidnapped, hostages like that. But I said, give it 2 or 3 days because I promise you, I know the narrative. And the narrative is not, and that's why I find it so laughable when people say that the narrative is pro, that the narrative is if you're with a narrative, you're pro Israel or whatever, because the narrative is never pro Israel. The narrative is always anti Israel. And I told you that shift is going to happen much quicker than it would happen in any other circumstance. So imagine something like that, what happened there happened in Australia. How many people died in the Bali bombings? Do you remember? Hundreds.
Australians, yeah, not this, not I think a couple of hundred maybe.
Yeah, a couple hundred in one bomb, and it was something that we rightfully fucking. Sorry, it's something I can't believe I'm swearing at this point, but it's something
Mm.
that we
202 people
we
died.
202 people. We commemorate and we think about it. Every time I go to Bali, I go to that bombing site. It's something that we hold deep as Australians, and we have a close connection, and it hurt and it pained us, right? So, and in Israel here, you have, what was it, 1,500? I think over 1,000 were civilians. Just 200 were hostages, and in a country about I guess a third, less than a third of Australia. What do we? I think there's 8 or 9 million here. Australia's got about 30. So this affected everyone. But if it happened in Australia, we would be talking about it. Everyone would be talking about it for years to come. In Israel, I knew at the time you're buying yourself 2 days, because the narrative is against Israel. And I knew that this was, as much as I didn't want to, and every time there's a conflict in Israel, I have a conflict internally because, it's Israel that got me. Anyone who's read my book, anyone that knows anything beyond my COVID reporting, or anyone that's even listened to all my COVID reporting, because I talk about it at times, will know that is the issue of Israel and the misconceptions, the lies, the fake news about Israel is what got me into alternative media and citizen journalism. That's literally what got me into it. But every time there's a conflict, I have an internal battle because I know the wave of hate that I'm going to receive. And it's one of those things that I just put up with because at the end of the day, you do something because it's right, not because it's popular, and heck, that's the entire reason why I got into this. And you got to remember where the hate is coming from. It's coming from the far left that want to see the destruction of Israel because of whatever they're virtuous, for the same reason why they're proposing to divide Australia by race. So they don't believe that Israel has a right to exist at all. It comes from nowadays more than a few years ago from, the far right, those neo-Nazi groups that love to hijack everything. But they're a non-scary minority. The far left are far more powerful. But they're there. It comes from then, of course, the majority of the Islamic world. Even that has shifted a little bit since the Abraham Accords. This is the first conflict where Israel actually has any allies in the Middle East, like the United Arab Emirates, probably the staunchest. But and potentially, at least in the back rooms, more now Saudi Arabia. But it doesn't matter. It's the first time. But if you look at the numbers, and that's why there's such a wave of hate, is that they've got the numbers one to push out the narrative, which the narrative is Palestinians are the victims, Israel's are the perpetrators. They deserve basically everything that's coming to them. And if you're not somebody that can stomach what happened last Saturday, then all we'll tell you is it's not real. They're playing it up. It's bullshit. They were soldiers that they were targeting, blah, 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 blah. Even though the terrorists themselves live streamed it. The Israeli victims filmed it and uploaded stuff. The authorities showed you pictures of the aftermath of babies, So I knew I had to come in.
Well,
I really
I do remember you telling me that, and I didn't really understand what, like, in terms of that narrative shift and what that is. But as an outsider, again, someone in Australia, I think for me, I realized that this is a more complex issue, even than maybe what you're kind of portraying it as an outsider looking at this. And I think that's something we're grappling with in our community, because the reactions that I felt, and I think many Australians felt, there were alternative reactions to that as well, because I did see people the day after or that night of in Australia celebrating, and this is a very
yeah.
small minority of people. I don't want to portray everyone like this, but there was a small minority of people who were on the street celebrating, and I think there was a car that was driving around Sydney somewhere with fireworks. There were some preachers that were saying some, I would say, inflammatory type language, which is something that maybe as
Not
Australians
not
who are not.
not inflammatory, Rukshan. It's not inflammatory. Like inflammatory is saying something. It was literally calling for the death and destruction, saying this is what they've been waiting for. That's beyond inflammatory,
Yes,
and
but I'm saying
that
many Australians wouldn't maybe. It's a hard thing for people to understand, maybe. Like, when people talk to me about this topic, because obviously, again, we're multicultural, and I have a lot of friends who are either from that part of the world, and when they explain it to me, they will tell me, for 75 years, this is usually how it's portrayed to me. For 75 years, these people have been oppressed, they've been caged up, they've been put in this position, and whatever you're seeing them doing is an act of resistance. Now, at one level, if I put myself into those shoes, I can see that. But as an Australian, as someone, I've tried to explain this to people as well, as someone who's looking at this from the outside with Australian values, uh, it's hard for me to justify terrorism based on something like that. But at one level, I do see how, if you're in this position, you could potentially see that as being a justified act of resistance. And I'm saying this as someone who has, similar to you, Avi, come from a country where there's been a civil war, about 30 years, almost 300,000 people dead, multiple suicide bombings, very similar. We have what people in the Sri Lankan government would say is a terrorist group, the LTTE, but the Tamil minority in Sri Lanka will say that they are the freedom fighters fighting for the freedom of the Tamil minority in that country who are being oppressed by the Sinhalese majority. Now, I saw that firsthand how that played out in that country, and the way that my Tamil friends would explain it to me is that these people are their freedom fighters. It's an act of resistance. The suicide bombings, all these things that these people are doing is because they are against a force that is so powerful that this is the only way that they can actually obtain their freedom. And, as a young person, I didn't really understand that concept. But the older that I got, and the more that I discovered that, yes, the government in my country is somewhat oppressive. Yes, the government in my country is causing trouble for these people. Yes, the laws that in my country are causing issues where, Tamil people are not at the same level of respect as the Sinhalese people. So I saw it from that perspective. So that's what I'm saying when I tell people that I understand what Palestinian people, in particular, when they talk about oppression and what they're feeling, what they're saying, that many Australians wouldn't be able to necessarily relate with, like how is an act of terrorism an act of resistance? That's something that we have to grapple with as a community, and it's really difficult to grapple with. But at one level, at a surface level, I understand. But as an Australian who now lives in Australia and has Australian values and sees life through living in Australia in peace, I find it difficult to see people on the street celebrating terrorism. I find it difficult to see Australians, my fellow Australians, celebrating things which are horrendous, like killing families, killing elderly people, kidnapping people, taking people hostage as an act of resistance. Of course, as an Australian, if I agree with those things, it's problematic because that is not the Australian way. Like we would, like you say, if something happened in Australia to some people in a town here, and someone came from another country and took people from our city, they took them from Melbourne to somewhere else. As an Australian, I would be greatly distressed, and I wouldn't be able to see it in that way. So there's that complex layering of this issue for us in this country when we're looking at this, because you're Jewish, you're my friend, I understand from your perspective, but I also get it from that perspective. But then there's also the Australian perspective, and I feel like in this country right now, we're grappling with all of this. So if that kind of makes sense to you, like how do you respond
Yeah,
to
listen,
some of the
Rukshan,
criticism
I
of that?
think listen. Like we've talked about this on the show before, not during wartime, and I don't think I think as I grew up, um, my view on it became a lot more nuanced, and we've literally talked about it, and I think a bit like you, I can actually now understand um, the Palestinian cause and the suffering. I absolutely sympathise with the average Palestinian that has only ever known either Gaza. So I'm going to talk as somebody that actually knows the geography, unlike old mate who's made video talking about occupied territories. So Gaza, just for people who don't know, Gaza is not occupied anymore. There is now a border. It was given back in 2005 for peace. And they shared one border with Israel and one with Egypt. The Egyptian one people don't talk about because you can't blame Israel. But both have been closed while they elected Hamas to be their leadership in what was essentially a violent takeover. Uh, but actually, no, it was they were voted in democratically in 2005, right when Israel gave it back, and then the other Fatah, which is who runs the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, who's um, a lesser of two evils, I guess. But they, and when I say evils, I'm saying terrorism, sponsor terrorism, and that. But they're not. They don't have the code of what's it called that the Hamas do, which straight up tells you exactly what they call for, which is the annihilation of the Jewish state in total, right? But they did get voted in, and then Fatah was not relinquishing power, and then it was a violent takeover to actually take what the Palestinians in Gaza voted for. Now, so I sympathise with the Palestinian that grew up not knowing anything but living in either Gaza, and there would be certainly now, because it's been 18 years, there'll certainly be Palestinians that have not left Gaza. And I'd also understand the ones in the West Bank. And I can feel their struggle and their pain. But at the same time, I also understand that one, the blame doesn't fully lie with Israeli government and Israeli policy. Some does. But one, that's not the Israeli civilians' fault. The person living in a kibbutz on the border. This is not. We're not talking about what is disputed territory. You're talking about Israel proper. Why they get punished for your grievances with government, firstly, and secondly is I don't think that the fault, actually I think the majority of the fault lies with Palestinian leadership. If you look historically, if you're actually not lazy and you look at every time that there was a peace deal on the table and why it was knocked down, and I can tell you, I believe that they were knocked down because this war is needed by it needs to continue for leadership within the Palestinian leadership. That, in fact, like that, for them to govern, they need the chaos. They need to control it, and it's a bit like many places in the Middle East. But nobody talks about those places in the Middle East because it doesn't. You don't have the boogie monster, the Israeli Israel, to be able to attack for it, or even in Africa. But so I absolutely sympathise with the Palestinians. I don't accept that anyone sees terrorism as a justified means of resistance, because even the Palestinians today, if you look at Hamas, they're walking it back. The leadership on ABC, they're trying to say that no, what happened is bad. Civilians should never be targeted. We were going for soldiers. They basically essentially lost control of their fighters, although they're not releasing the hostages right now. So everybody knows it's 2023. Everybody, we live in the digital time where everybody's connected and everybody understands a moral sense of, um, everybody has a moral compass, and these guys, that live by Islamic law, they basically they point. I've seen a lot of Muslims point at Islamic law, saying they can't do that because according to Islamic law, you're not allowed to kill a woman, and even Hamas, they point to that as evidence, even though the actual evidence from the ground shows that they acted, and we know, like these Islamic extremist groups like ISIS, like Hamas or Hezbollah, or even in Afghanistan, the Taliban. That this is how they act, because they show doctrine that says you can't attack them, but they also do see they see every civilian as a legitimate target.
Yeah.
So
I guess I wasn't trying to justify acts of terrorism. It's more so the complex layer of it, because
trying to understand.
Trying to understand from that perspective, because that is kind of I see a lot of that being expressed, particularly online and at the protests, where this is oppression. They're being oppressed, and this is a act of resistance, as bad as it looks, as terrible as it is. And it might not be exactly as it's being reported, but whatever, it doesn't matter. As far as that goes, like, we have to look at it in that context. We cannot just look at the act of terrorism that happened against the civilians in Israel in those border towns as an isolated incident. We have to also consider the past to understand why that happened, and maybe why our reaction has to be muted.
Yeah. I get what you're saying. I know what you're saying. I know that you're saying that's their talking. That's their justification. That's literally what the definition of justification means. You're justifying and you're apologizing. you're apologizing for a terrorist group by saying that their actions were justified because they are that they're an oppressed people, right? What I would respond to that, and that's the thing. That's why often with Israel haters, you got nothing to talk about, because if you're somebody that can say terrorism is justified, then what do you want Israel to do? What do you want Israel to do? Do you need Israel to accept the terrorism? Or do you need Israel to do what is in Hamas's charter? Like, do they need to be from, this is also the same protest. What they chant is, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That doesn't mean a two-state solution. From the river to the sea means there is no Israel. And, I don't know if those lefties that are marching alongside, extremists who are chanting that realize what they're saying, but I think they do. I think they think that this should be, they're completely taking one side, one version of history, and so then, what
But
do you
I
want
mean,
Israel to
yeah.
do?
If to be fair, like that could be an impassioned, like a impassioned thing to. I understand the context around how it, could mean something really bad, but it also could be this
It's where it
impassioned.
comes from. It
Yeah.
comes from the terror. Well, that chant comes from the terrorist group, from the PLO. It's an old chant that's always been marched, and they also, because they sing another chant, which is in Arabic. It's Taiba Taiba Al Yahud. Like, I
Mm.
don't actually know now, but it's in reference to old Islamic history where
Yeah,
he
I mean,
butchered all the
recently, I think I saw in Africa some of the groups that were there during the I guess some of that during that history there in Africa, they were singing these old songs, and it was literally "Kill the Boer," which is like "Kill the white man," and they were
yeah.
saying that they sing that as a call to resistance. They don't literally mean that that's what they want to do. So it is a possibility that
Rukshan, I believe them that that's what they mean when you see play out what happened last Saturday. And I think Israel. You know what? The biggest, if you believe in the Palestinian cause, if you believe in fighting for Palestinian for a Palestinian future, what happened last weekend was the biggest step back to any potential Palestinian anything. Israel was so divided before this. There were a lot of people sympathizing with the Palestinian, or open to sympathizing with the Palestinian cause, because of how divided, for the first time, Israel was. You saw some of the biggest demonstrations. You saw the anti-lockdown people so excited. They're protesting the government, this and that. But then what happened was, after last week's attack, all it did was unite the country, because the Hamas doesn't look at whether you're left or right. In fact, I would argue that most of the victims that from that attack, both at the party and at those kibbutzim, there were a lot of like left-leaning kibbutznikim are generally left-leaning, and the party was very left-leaning. So they yes, I think I'm talking too loud for the neighbor. So so you have the point I'm trying to make is that what they've done is they've that you cannot justify terrorism, and the moment that you do justify terrorism, then there's no one to talk to, and what's the point of Israel even trying to talk to you? Because if you say that that's okay, but then you have a problem with Israel then turning around and fighting back, because that's where we are now. You can, if on every issue you get a free pass because you say you have 75 years of history, and you're ignoring the 75 years or the thousands or the hundreds or whatever the history of the Jews, then you're never going to get anywhere. I accept that there is 75 years of history of the people in Gaza, the Palestinian people. I accept that. They don't accept that there's 75 years or hundreds, or even though in their own scripture there's thousands of years of Jewish history here. In fact, they rewrite that history. What's his name? What was this? Spaniard, who I just watched his video, and I just think, gosh, I would love to have a conversation with someone like that who has zero clue about the actual facts on the ground, who goes, he repeats their talking point of Israel's just a like a colonizer, although a colonizer, I don't think he says colonizer, but they use the term colonizer, which doesn't make sense because you've got to be a country to kind of colonize. But he says that they're not real Jews, they're white Jews from Europe, right, that have just come here and taken Palestinians' homes, where, firstly, even just factually, Israel is only half European Jew. The other half are Arabs like me, including Jews that come from Israel itself. So I guess the base we have to start on to have any discussion around Israel is, what are your values? Are your values that you can murder innocent civilians, you can rape, you can butcher kids? Because if that's your values, Rukshan, then you cannot complain about Israel's response. You can't
Well,
complain about it because it's your.
I want to get to the response, because I think it's
But, but,
you know
but that's but that's what I'm just
mm,
saying. If you're going to come at it from saying this is what the Middle East is like and war is barbaric, then don't turn around when there is a response to that violence with violence and say, oh, you're in the wrong.
mm. well, look, I mean, you've kind of explained your position on this as an Israeli, and if that might provide some context around a lot of the complaints I've seen around your reporting and what you're doing over there in terms of, covering the story, the truth about the war, and you there is a bias there, isn't there, that you can't get away from as an Israeli, like at that level where you understand that history, you're connected to that land, you're viscerally impacted by what's happened. So does that impact your objectivity? Does that make it harder for you to report? Like
Yeah, it doesn't make it
how do you
hard.
respond to
It doesn't. It, it,
those comments?
it doesn't make it hard for me to respond, and I find it funny because a lot of those people that make that argument, they loved my COVID reporting. But how could I be objective? I was a Victorian living under the brutal regime of Daniel Andrews, having to suffer through his lockdown after lockdown after lockdown after his restrictions. How could I be objective? How could I stand there and report from the front line about the police enforcement when they were brutally arresting me? How could I do it? That's how every single reporter does it. The difference is I'm not standing here pretending, and just like I didn't in COVID, pretend like I don't have a position. I absolutely have a position. Do you want to know my position? My position is, firstly, terrorism cannot be justified ever, period. Ever. And I think that Israelis and Palestinians deserve the right to live in security, safety, and with dignity. Right? How do we achieve that? Well, firstly, you can't break rule one. Terrorism is not a justification. If you think you know what's going on in Gaza, if you don't like the fact that I'm not in Gaza to report on it, well, firstly, either tune into people that are in Gaza doing live feeds, there's plenty of them, or go there yourself. Why don't you go yourself and you do it? Because I can tell you now that I wouldn't last a day over that border. I'll
Yeah,
get
because
lynched. In fact,
a lot of people are saying, in a lot of the comments, they're saying, if you want to tell the story, go to Gaza.
yeah,
Now, you know,
well,
yeah,
I practically cannot go to Gaza. I'll get lynched. In fact, I can see online I'm getting threats from Western Sydney and parts of Melbourne, telling me if I walk down their street, they're going to lynch me just for telling Israel's side of the story. And that's my point, is that whenever um, this is obviously one that's close to my heart, close to home. I have so much family that live here, and my own mother lives here, and I see the reality here, and I see it from a perspective that most people wouldn't see it, like the human side of it. And I literally, but even if I wanted to go, which I would love to go to Gaza, and I am trying to go to Palestinian territories that I can get to talk to
mm,
Palestinians. Don't get me wrong. I want the Palestinian. And if you actually watch my interviews, I actually put some of the questions that we get from, that I obviously don't believe in, but I put those questions to the people that I interview, because I think it's important for people to actually hear firstly, the Israelis answer the tough questions, plus to give the Palestinians the chance,
yeah,
firstly, to have their voice heard, but also to answer the tough questions like, do you support that barbaric act?
mm,
If yes, okay, you do so. What the hell are you complaining about
yeah,
now? You can't have it both ways. You can't be pro-violence but then sit there and cry victim.
Yeah.
But if you're anti-violent, I think you need to be
Yeah.
consistent. And
See, at a simplistic level, I kind of understand what people are saying when they say, like, well, you got to tell the story from the other side. You got to tell that story from Gaza as well. Like, it doesn't bring balance to your story. But realistically, like, as a realist, I guess people have to understand that right now Hamas are holding about 200 hostages who are Israeli. I don't think it's a
and
safe place for
and
journalists
and
who are
beyond,
Israeli or Jewish
yeah,
to be there, specifically doing that type of work where you're trying to potentially uncover stories or tell stories which might not be, something that's carries favor with that particular group. For instance, if you're uncovering something, I think it's a hard thing for people to understand that a lot of the times in these war zones, particularly in a conflict like this, such as this, in a civil war especially, a lot of the time the best work in those conflict areas can be done by international press, neutral people who can go to both sides perhaps, or who can have their presence felt on both sides because of that, ethnic, racial issue that you have in these type of civil conflicts. So, I mean, as a realist, I understand that. As someone who's observing the social media commentary around this and what people are saying to you, I kind of get what they're coming to you from as well. But I've been, telling people when they've asked me the same question about your reporting, is that there are actually a really a strong amount of independent journalists, pretty much all independent journalists who are doing some amazing work out of Gaza, and ordinary people filming stuff and putting stuff online. Now, the context around that may be hard to interpret sometimes, but that footage is not necessarily being censored. It's being shown to the world. This is not like the COVID times. I think people have to understand that during COVID, a lot of the things that we were seeing was being censored by governments, by social media companies. If you are hearing and talking about the what's happening in Gaza or Israel, a lot of that media is freely flowing through all types of different platforms and getting out there, even through mainstream platforms. So I think the stories on both sides are kind of being told, but people might perhaps be inferring more to the portrayal of those stories by journalists like yourself in how you contextualize also the reporting that's coming out of Gaza. Or is your focus really what you're doing on the ground there and responding to events, on the ground there? Because it is a conflict zone and there is things happening in Israel as well. So are you focused, I guess, more on that side of the story, like what's happening with the military there,
well,
what's happening with the people?
listen. I said when I'm coming here, I
Mm,
said the way I told people, rebel. We've always said we've come here to tell the other side of the story. The reason why so many people take the Gaza position is because they've been fed so much of it. They've fed it, the images over and over. Like I said in the beginning, because the numbers, it is actually a propaganda war where the numbers are on their side. There's just so many more people sharing. Besides for the first couple of days where it was the horrific scenes we saw, but once they got past that, like I predicted would happen, it became quickly the we're just seeing one side, and everybody's kind of forgotten what's happened and what the premise to this was, and what it's responding to, and the fact that there's even hostages. But having said all that, um, when I came here, I said I'm going to tell the other side of the story because the media is going to pivot from Israel being the victim of this heinous freaking crime, um, to them being the aggressor, and all the arguments that we're hearing now, and they're just bombarding, and all this stuff, whether it's true or not, and the mainstream media don't even care if it's true because they don't even verify half their stories. They don't care. They want the clicks. So my mission here is to show the human story, the real story, and tell the facts about what's going on here, even when people, one, trying to ignore it, whether it's the media, or two, people trying to deny it. People that I actually, it's the same this way. There's people that I thought during COVID I was following, and I thought, oh wow, good, they're talking against me, and they're doing the same thing. They're just making stuff up. They're just sharing half truths. They're and they're jumping on Hamas's word on
mm.
every little thing and then even when it's proved to be a lie and the damage is done, they don't correct
Yeah, I mean,
the
yeah,
record.
it's like I've told people, because this is kind of the first type of conflict that, since I started doing this kind of coverage, that I've really covered as well, in terms of, because obviously it's impacting Australia in the sense of
You've
the
gone
tensions
deep
within the
in.
community, right? So I've been looking into this as well, and kind of reporting on some aspects of it, particularly around the reactions in this country. And this is an intense war of propaganda like I haven't seen. And it's a little bit more different also to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, in terms of
Yeah,
how, when I say propaganda, I'm not saying something is wrong or right. I'm saying how things are interpreted, because sometimes I'm seeing the same video and it's given two different interpretations. And
yeah,
if you just glance at that and you read that interpretation, they're both plausible. And it's only until you dig into that and then you see the other layers that can add to it, you can find a bit more context around it and maybe form an opinion around that. But even then, in the fog of war, it was very different. Like at this, people ask me, why did you believe everything that was happening at the very start? Well, the reason is, as someone who watches a lot of this kind of things happening, the very start, a lot of that footage was actually live streamed by Hamas themselves.
yeah,
This is the difference that people have to understand. At the very onset, people were taking credit for what they were doing. They were celebrating. They were live streaming. So it's easy to understand that type of footage. Today, when we see whether it's a rocket attack or whether it's something, a scene after a bombing, whatever it is, the context is not as easy to ascertain, because now it's a fog of war. Now it's propaganda. Now it's all types of things. Again, I'm not saying the veracity of the videos and information that we're getting from either Israel or Gaza is not real or whatever. I'm saying it's the interpretation of that becomes harder. So I guess the point I was trying to make is, when you're over there, and are you able to have time to see all this as well, or is it kind of
not not really. Look, I'm running. So Israel's quite a small country, but to get from, so I'm based in the south next to the Gaza border, but there's obviously the north is also heating up with Hezbollah. So I travel to the north, and then I also have to go to Jerusalem or the West Bank to cover that. So I'm running around. So all day I'm getting the notifications straight from the home front warnings. So you kind of get half the story, like the understanding of what's happening on the ground around the country from the warnings on the apps telling you where the rockets, who's firing what, and also what the IDF is doing in response. But I don't follow it on Twitter, and I just every once in a while, when I have 10 minutes, 20 minutes, I sit down on Twitter, and take a look at what the conversation is, and it goes like it's crazy, because it's exactly as you described. I think the Gaza hospital is the best example of it, and the most obvious example of it, where something is posted first by Hamas, and then the IDF's not even sure. At the beginning, they had to check, and then it comes out, they realized, well, they didn't make an airstrike there, and then they just look at actual cameras that were just rolling live at the time, and then they start getting their intelligence. They gather the intelligence, and then it turns out, but it doesn't matter, because by that point, everybody's just condemning, or at least those that want to believe. That's the thing. It's confirmation bias, 100%.
yeah? I mean,
People who want to,
there's been a few stories like that, and from both sides,
yeah.
and uh,
Absolutely, you have to try beat your confirmation. What I'll tell people is just be critical about it, but don't be delusional. If you're going into it saying you think everything Israel is saying is a lie, and they're paid actors, and well, I'm not here to report for you, because you don't want to see the truth. You want me to confirm what you believe, and I'm not here to do that. And even to Israelis, like I challenge some of their things. But one thing that's clear to me, and again, why I think that this attack on Israel has thrown peace out for the foreseeable future, is because this is the first time that I think Israelis are united in the fact that they've got to win this war, and winning this war means annihilating Hamas. Let's be clear. Their war is with Hamas and not with the average Palestinian, even though now the trust for the average Palestinian is gone because of a couple of issues. So firstly, even within that first attack, if you watch the surveillance and what Hamas is trying to blame some of the atrocities on, is that civilians, once Hamas broke in and started killing the people and kind of paved the way, civilians started from Gaza started driving in and started looting and raping and pillaging and taking hostages themselves. So the average Israeli goes, "You want me to feel bad for the civilian when the civilians can do that?" You know, if an Israeli settler, those are the extremist Israelis. If they did that, every Israeli would condemn it, whereas Palestinians are not. And you can defend it all you want with the oppressed people, whatever, but that's the fact, right? The I lost my train of thought.
Just to push back on that, but isn't that also the case from the other side? I mean, that's kind of we're going back to what I was saying before.
In what way?
In the sense that that's why people aren't, in Palestine perhaps, or watching from around the world. That's why they're not empathetic to some of the scenes that they've seen, because they feel like, well, this has happened to them. They've been because we have. No, I'm saying in the context, not. Let's say not that type of terrorist attack. In terms of
Well, that's what I'm referring to.
Military
That's what
strikes,
I'm referring.
bombings, people being killed, kids being killed. Like those things have happened. Like those people have gone through it. Like that has actually happened.
Yep.
And that is the context of this. And I understand that we can in the West perhaps see a difference between acts of terrorism and acts of collateral damage, because at the end of the day, countries like Australia, countries like America, we're not scot-free in this as well. Like, we've been bombing the Middle East for almost
far worse.
3 decades now. We've been
yeah.
bombing buildings and killing all types of civilians. I think hundreds of thousands of people between Iraq, Afghanistan. Like the West is in that kind of mind frame as well. And we're also
far greater. If you look at
what I'm trying to illustrate is we still see like the word it's explained to us as well that is collateral damage, whereas acts of terror are different. But
it just morally is. So, Rukshan, what I would say to you is two things. Firstly, yes, the West is far more responsible for collateral damage in the Middle East, especially fighting in wars that wasn't for their existence, fighting other people's wars or fighting for oil or whatever. But at no time do they. So Israel has the door knock bomb that they drop before they drop a bomb. So it taps it basically says, gives you a first warning to leave, and then and that's after they drop flyers and like now like they told everybody go to the south because they're bombing the north. No other army does that. Whether you agree with the bombings or not is irrelevant because no other army, no other air force does it. Then on top of that, if you can't see the moral difference, if you think there's a moral equivalence between targeting civilians specifically, butchering and raping and everything we saw there, and military precision strikes trying to avoid civilians, the worst thing for Israel, whether you think they like the Palestinians or not, the worst thing for them is civilian casualties because it helps the propaganda war. That's why when that bomb they claimed that Israel did, they said 500 civilians were dead, and you just saw people couldn't handle it. That almost would have ended the war because of the kind of outrage around even the supporters of Israel, right? But it turned out to be false because Israel just doesn't. That would be the worst thing for Israel. Israel doesn't want to get civilians. Hamas, on the other hand, targeted civilians. Plus, they put their civilians in harm's way to try to make sure that the Israelis get as many civilian casualties to ensure that something like the support that they would have got to the hospital. So if you think that there's a moral equivalent, I don't know how to talk to you. I understand you say it's the Middle Eastern mind frame, but you can't come in and out of the Middle Eastern mind frame, Rukshan. This is the thing. People, and I kind of made this point before, but I'll make it again here, is if you're saying that you're in the Middle Eastern mind frame where you say that this is all justified because we are an oppressed people, so so the only response to that is going to be the Middle Eastern response, which is the bombardment and more pain and suffering. But if you want to step back and say, hold on, we are people that want to, we don't believe in barbaric acts. We don't believe in indiscriminate violence. Then let's step back and talk. Israel's made. You just look at the region. Israel's managed to make peace with, and in fact, give land back to anyone that really wants to make peace. Egypt, Jordan, United Arab Emirates is real peace, in my opinion, but that they had no border and no land to talk about. But Egypt and Jordan have been at peace with Israel for many, many decades now because of that reason. And so too the Palestinians, if they really wanted. But the people making these arguments, they're doing it in bad faith. You're doing it in bad faith. If you think that Israel should accept an attack on its people, and if you accept one, it means you're accepting daily attacks on its civilian population, as brutal as we saw, without responding with everything they have, then there's nothing to talk to. You're not somebody. You're not a real person. You're not. We can't take you seriously. Because think about it for a second. I understand that you're thinking about the Gazans' perspective, the Palestinians' perspective, the fact that they've been, but if that was your family and you happened to be born on this side of the thing, or you didn't do anything, you just like you happened to be born in Australia with all the privileges that come with that. There are people here that were born and grew up and generations live in Israel. There's nothing they can do about the fact that they were born Jewish. There's nothing but if you believe that they should pay the price for that, just like Hitler thinks that they should have paid the price for it, then you're not a serious person that people can really listen to you and take your advice on how we should sort this issue out.
Mm.
The problem here is it is a very, very hard, like a deep issue that and a thing that's going to take both sides compromise. But the compromising stops at terrorizing
Mm.
civilians, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Is I can't argue with that. I can't
Mm.
argue with that because also those people you can't. There's no point. You're not convincing them. I'm not trying to convince the person that has made up his mind, his or her mind, and has been on the Palestinian victim side, and the Palestinians could do no wrong because they've had 75 years
Yeah.
of oppression, even though you don't want to talk about what that oppression and who's really oppressing them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I have a bit of a connection to this in terms of a little bit understanding what this feels like. Again, from that perspective of the Sri Lankan civil war between the Sinhalese and Tamils, and you know that civil war ended about, I think, 2008, 2009, something like this, and it was a almost a devastating end to that war, and very similar
Yeah,
to this in the sense how the international community was watching. Obviously, social media wasn't around as much as it is
yeah,
today, but you did have the Sri Lankan military going out there in towards the Jaffna area and chasing down what they would term as the LTTE terrorists, and actually even killing the leader Prabhakaran himself. And people
yeah.
might not understand the Sri Lankan civil war today, but the LTTE, Prabhakaran, these are masterminds of a lot of the suicide bombing attacks that we've seen around the world. They pioneered a lot of this.
I think they were
And
the original suicide bombers, weren't they?
yes, they pioneered a lot of the techniques, and they're credited with, I guess, starting a wave of suicide bombings within Sri Lanka, buses, also all types of things. So the country was on edge in terror. Now, my people who are Sinhalese and didn't grow up in Australia, they have a very different understanding of that compared to me, having grown up in Australia. And I grew up with Tamil friends. I didn't see it from that perspective, and I never got that sense of that historical animosity towards each other, and I'm very grateful for that, because I can look here today, and even though the civil wars ended, there's still issues in that country. There's still grievances. There's still problems there with the government maybe overstepping their bounds, and there's still a movement for people who are Tamil to get their homeland still in Sri Lanka, Tamil Eelam. So this is all still a very fresh issue, even the civil wars ended. But living in Australia, seeing that me, myself, and Tamil people, we get along, they intermarry. There's a cultural connection there, and lots of people obviously within the community. And I feel very privileged and lucky to be in Australia in that instance. So I can kind of look at these issues in that way and think, why can't we enjoying the privileges that we do in our country in Australia want that same thing for our people who are having these struggles in their homelands, despite the history. Now, I know it's very complicated, but that is kind of the way that I see this. And it's very difficult for me then to see the problems that we're having. You know, Jewish people in our community right now, they're very afraid. You know, I'm hearing reports and I'm talking to people as well and seeing this, that they're afraid to identify as Jewish in terms of, you know, wearing particular clothing. They want to get
Think
security
about
guards for.
that. Just think about that.
Yeah, I
Like,
mean, it's
I'm
very
saying to
serious.
you, the same people that are condemning Israel so strongly and targeting Jews so strongly now for many years, whether it's from
Mm,
the left who, you know, rallied against anti-fascists, for the cause of anti-Islamophobia for years, targeted these fringe groups that really didn't really do anything, and to a community, to the Muslim community that's about, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'd guesstimate there's 10 or 20 times the size of the Jewish community in Australia. So,
mm,
um, you were talking about a tiny fringe. I'm talking about in 2015, 2016, when there were these waves of protests through the rise of Islamic terrorism around the world, and there was these protests, these anti-Islamic protests, and then the left came, the same people that are marching for anti-Islam, fighting Islamophobia, because they were saying that they're targeting, and the Islamic community is living in fear. Well, now those same people, those same lefties, are joining forces with now their supposed victims from back then, in joining in Jew hatred to a tiny community, even just in Australia, in a tiny community in Australia. So the Islamic communities, including that leader that you mentioned in the beginning, the cleric who was celebrating the actual violent, the barbaric attack as the day, I think he called it the day we're waiting for. But you know what? I don't think the entire Islamic community feels that way, but it is a very
mm,
mainstream view. And
yeah.
you just look at my inbox to know it is a mainstream view. And when the shoe was on the other foot, the 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 fear wasn't even as great, because number one is it was a tiny minority targeting a huge Islamic community, which was also wrong. But the fear wasn't as justified, because it wasn't such a time. This is like literally tiny. And how many Muslims during that period got bashed? How many Muslims got physically attacked? How many Muslims got physically um, uh, uh,
Yeah.
threatened or whatever? Here we're seeing it daily to a tiny community, in the name of what? In the name of tolerance, or because of a war overseas that actually has nothing to do with the Australians here, the Australian Jews. So I think
Yeah,
that
no, like there is that in the Jewish community, but on the flip side as well, within the Palestinian communities and the larger Arabic Muslim communities, Islamic communities in our country, they're also feeling. This is the sense that I get. They're feeling somewhat ignored. Now I know there's protests happening and there's a lot of support uh, as well, but in terms of the support from openly from government, because we've had, of course, our prime minister, our opposition leader, come out very strongly in support of
again,
Israel.
I hear all of that, but
Yeah.
again, I'm putting, there's two issues here, right? You could talk about the political side and support and that, but
Mm.
on the other side, you've got a community living in fear in Australia, which those same people marching against the Jews, both the left and the Islamic community, were marching only a few years ago, crying victim about a tiny minority that could not do anything to them realistically. Whereas if there was no police and there was no security services, there would be mayhem in Australia right now. We know it. We have groups of Muslim men hunting Jews in Australia. And again, that might not be the entire Islamic community, but what they say, even the Islamic community, the ones that don't support it, they go, "Oh, you can understand. They're being ignored. They're being ignored."
Yeah. I
Now,
mean, I
you
did find that
can't.
troubling because I do remember, like, in Australia, like during the Christchurch massacre, when all that happened,
Yeah,
religious leaders from all different groups come together and they condemn these acts
everyone.
and they show unity and they show this strong front. but I have been listening to, you know, a lot of the radio and stuff where some of the people, I think from the Islamic Council, they came on and they're having a very difficult time condemning certain actions, which I've, again, if I understand from that context of all this stuff, yeah, I get. But as an Australian, it's hard to understand why they wouldn't just say, yes, you know, we have to get behind with the Jewish community
But
as well, and
it's
ensure unity
the
and harmony
entire,
in our community. I see that happening. I definitely see that happening. I think that's wrong. I think it's
and
wrong
that's
that
my
people.
problem with this whole conflict. That's the whole problem with this conflict, whether it's here or there. And that's the thing. You say, you know, here it's understand. We cannot accept that in Australia. We cannot accept that in Australia, where you justify any kind of violence because on the first day they were justifying it here and celebrating it here, and then when it came to our shores, suddenly they're justifying any sort of violence on or any sort of threat, intimidation to a community, a minority community on our shores, because we have to understand they're feeling ignored by the government. Hell no, hell no. You know what? Like, you don't. No one has the right to target innocent civilians. To target innocent civilians, whether it's in Melbourne, Sydney, or Israel, and that's got to be the foundation to the entire conversation. And yes, there is suffering on all sides. Heck, there's suffering in a lot of places in the world. But one thing as human we need to all accept is that no, you can't target the Jewish community, innocent Jews, even if they support Israel, even if they don't want to see the annihilation of their the only Jewish state in the world and their Jewish family. Yes, you cannot bring violence or threaten them in Australia. And the same thing goes for here. You cannot target, you go for the military, go for it.
Yeah.
Even then, but even then there will be a response to military
Yeah.
targets. You know.
I mean, look, you're displaying, I guess, strong moral and ethical, you know, values which are common to the West. Definitely, like particularly in Australia, I think they're very common to the way that we see the world. But you know, I want to put this to you because another criticism, and I think this is one that's been widely shared, and I kind of get it as well. Even though that I am your friend, when I see these older videos of you discussing
Yeah.
your time as an IDF soldier, and to be fair, like a lot of this has to be looked through that lens as well. The way that people see you, you're someone that served in the Israeli military,
Yeah.
and you know the comments that you've made in the past in this video that's circulating, where you're talking about, you know, shooting people. You're talking about I think someone throwing rocks and you're shooting them in the head or the heart, and you're justifying things against what people are saying is against innocent people. Now, can you talk to that time during your life? I know it's
So,
in your book. I know
yeah.
some of this is in your book as well. Like a lot of
Yeah.
this has been
Look.
reported by people that it's been. I know all this because it's in your book. Some of it's also stuff that people dig up about you as a criticism all the time. These are publicly available videos, but I
You know,
think
and look, it's people
some
trying.
people are being exposed to it now, and it calls into question. You know, you're giving me these really strong moral and ethical views about against, you know, how we should behave against innocent people and all this kind
Yeah.
of stuff. So it calls all that into
Yeah.
question. If I'm going to be fair, so I think you
Yeah.
should
Yeah. No.
probably
No.
respond to that as well.
It's fair, but like I said to you before, when I was young, my position has grown and become much more nuanced over time. Now, those videos, let's just be clear what those videos, because they're cutting little sections of of videos that I'm not necessarily proud of them. I think that there was a period in about 2016 when I started getting on camera that and I talk about it in the book, where I don't really like the way I conveyed my message. It was a lot more confrontational, whereas now I like to talk to people, and especially people I disagree with. But even having said that, they're cutting bits out of it. And it's funny, the people that they're the videos. So they're cutting videos of me with this guy called so it's Mohammed Hijab and another YouTube. And these guys are extremists. They talk about annihilating, you know, the annihilation of Israel.
Yes,
They
I've
have
seen videos
they,
on the other end. Yes.
yeah, they celebrate the attacks. All right, now when you watch those little snippets that these guys are putting together, it was this guy's going, so you shot people like this kid, right? Now the photo he's showing me, you don't actually see. It's not a kid. It's somebody that's attacking Israel. And I go, yes, I've shot terrorists. I never said in there that I shoot kids or I shoot, like, it's just taken. They take that little snippet that I'm saying, and you've also got to remember the context. At the time in 2016, I was in London in Hyde Park, surrounded. What you don't see in that is surrounded by probably 150 of them, all basically calling me a child killer and a murderer. And so my way of dealing with it, which again, if I could take my time back, I probably wouldn't have done it, was to say, yeah, I shot, yeah, okay, you know, and but no, I never said, I never in any of those videos said that I shot kids, and I don't, like, even then when I was saying it, I was saying it from I'd never ever thought you should target innocent civilians. It's always been, and that's kind of what always made me proud of my service, is that we're part of a moral army, just like the Australian Army. I believe that we find the sanctity of life. We protect the sanctity of life, whereas the enemy often does the opposite. They believe in death. They believe that becoming a martyr is a special thing. I don't think so. Um, those videos, more than anything, are embarrassing. First, because of how I acted, but also how they were cut. So if you're really interested, go watch. I know Muhammad Hijab is. I forgot the other guy's name, but they're full blown Islamic extremists, full blown. That and that were platformed because they, until now, they've been the biggest victims of Islamophobia and all this stuff. They've been the voices of that, and when they tried to challenge me on my support for Israel, they came with loaded questions of, you shot people like this, and you're talking about people that are trying, like we saw here. It was literally, from memory, it was a photo of tear gas being shot at the border of Gaza, and one that hit him. And that's the thing. Like, I do regret celebrating the IDF taking down, it was one specific photo where there was tear gas they got him in the face, and there was tear gas in the face for one of the guys at the border who were throwing rocks. So yeah, I don't think, and that's probably where I've certainly grown, especially through the COVID time, where I got to actually seeing people protest. Even though in Melbourne, remember again, in Melbourne, no one was throwing rocks at police. Police were tear gassing people for nothing. So there's a big difference there as well. You don't see here. You do not see here police engaging, targeting anyone without provocation or justification. And let's refer back to rules of engagement. In Melbourne, police breached the rules of engagement. Police were far more brutal. They targeted people just for the simple act of protesting. Whereas here, all those images, even that one that I'm embarrassed of today, of my response to it, it was a guy throwing rocks, and they're throwing Molotov cocktails and things like that. So they're not just innocent protesters. They're targeting. Anyways, that's what.
No, look, I mean, I can in that kind of comparison, I can kind of understand that, but it's not something that I could defend you on per se as something that's but
Listen.
but
Look,
that's what I
I
mean. I
talk
think
about
people
in
have
my
to understand it's not something that I can defend you, or anyone else can defend you. And people do things, but you yourself have to account for those type of actions. And I think a lot of this, particularly around your criticism, like, this is the price you pay for your past actions, and it's a part of it.
exactly, and
And whether you've grown from it
you
or
know
not.
what, Rukshan, I absolutely accept. And I just say, look, for the people that are jumping on, what is it? Instead of arguing the issue, they go for character assassination. People jumping on that. I say, firstly, one, I've grown from where I was. What was it? 8 years ago. Two. Yeah, my position has absolutely changed. To watch the full context of it, because they're snipping out of context the worst bit. Even the full context, I'm embarrassed of the way I acted, and I talk about it extensively in my book. I actually wish I could take that time back in my life, but you need to look at this through the lens of what's happening now.
Yeah.
And look, if you don't like me, you don't have to like. I don't need. This is not a popularity
Look,
contest.
I think,
If
yeah,
this was a popularity contest,
yeah.
I would fight for Palestine,
It's not
and I would
popularity
support the
contest, but
killing of Jews.
I get that criticism of you. I understand it. Even
Yeah,
as someone who is your friend, I understand that criticism of you. And if I was someone that wanted to diminish your character or argue against your point or wasn't happy
absolutely,
with your coverage,
absolutely,
that is definitely something I
absolutely.
would use. And even someone like Muhammad Hijab, these other guys in those videos, they're kind of they're being interviewed on mainstream platforms and they have viewers and platforms as well. But they have these extreme views on the other end in their past as well, and
And they get it,
sometimes even
and
today. So we have to understand all of this in that context. That yes, people have histories, people have past. I mean, as a mature adult, I understand that even people who end up in jail, for instance, can come out reformed for their past actions. Like, I get that as an adult, but in these
but
debates,
I just want to be
it does
absolutely
color it.
clear. I want to be absolutely clear. I'm embarrassed in the things that I said, and more the way I said it. But I actually, like, if you actually watch and the context, if you're actually listening to what I said, it was just really the way I conveyed it. But I wasn't actually saying anything wrong. I was saying Israel needs to defend its border.
Hmm.
Never in my life have I supported any attacks on innocent civilians. So, like, I'm embarrassed just because I've grown as an adult, and
Hmm.
I hate that I ever conducted myself like that. But those guys that were interviewing me are terrorist sympathizers and supporters, and everything I said and the way I did was not actually factually wrong. It was just I probably shouldn't have celebrated. Like, I shouldn't have celebrated in that way when somebody throwing a rock, that they hit him probably not in a way that they even intended. But that's one isolated incident, and it wasn't, and it's not really even about
Yeah.
my views of the
Yeah.
situation.
Look, I mean, I want to jump to, I guess, what's happening right now.
I'm gonna have to get a charger here. Hold on, I'm gonna get
Yeah, go
charger
grab
to
a
my
charger.
phone.
Go grab a charger. That's okay. I might just go get some water as well. Sorry, guys. Give me 1 second. Sorry, guys. I was just getting a charger for his computer. If you have any questions, you can put them in. I'll see if I can get to any of these questions. A lot of these questions that I'm asking Avi and talking about, I've actually been monitoring on Instagram and Facebook, where I put up a request for people to have questions. So I'm trying to get through as much of them as possible. We're probably gonna going on for another half an hour, 45 minutes. I'm not sure, but yeah, if you have any questions, put them in. Just write question at the start, and if I can, I will get to them.
Yeah, just pass me the power pack. Sorry, I realised I got the wrong cables. I probably got about 10 minutes, so let's because we've actually got to head out. The
Okay,
team's
that's fine.
already.
10 minutes, that's fine. So look, what I wanted to get to is what's happening today, because
Yeah,
okay, we talked about what happened and the horrors of how all this started, but you know, for me, someone that's watching this, and maybe you're not seeing some of this because you're on the ground working and covering it from what's happening there. You know, I closely monitor a lot of the footage that's coming out of Gaza itself. And I also want to note there's been lots of journalists who have died as well, getting this kind of this footage out there. So there's some people really really out there in these war zones getting this footage, but it's horrendous stuff, man. Like, it's like, you know, if we compare what happened in the terror attacks and what's happening now when it
yeah,
comes to the response from the
yeah,
Israeli government and the IDF, in terms of the horrors, it's either comparable or worse in many ways. And I'm talking about the leveling of the cities, just innocent people getting caught up in this. Do you think people there, or you yourself, or the people in Israel, are they seeing this, or is they're shut out from it? Tell me
No, I
about
think
people in Israel.
absolutely. Listen, they're seeing it. Everyone's seeing it. I'm seeing it, and in fact, like it's aired on TV here now. I would say to you two things. Is firstly, most people are sympathetic. Like it's painful to see any, uh, especially children suffering, right? But having said that, most people say, "What do you want us to do? What do you want us to do?" We give the warnings. We tell them to move. I know people say, "Where are they going to move?" Well, it's the northern part of Gaza. There's literally the bottom where they can go to, and Israel does warn as much. Like they've literally given. I think the 24-hour warning started on Friday, so that before they even started bombarding, they warn them and they tell them, please move south. Hamas tells people not to move. What do you want? So what can Israel do? They can't defend themselves because they're going to hide behind human shields. Like, it's hard to watch. I agree, but I
Yeah,
don't
I
know
mean,
what the
I just want
alternative.
to pull up this photo. Just give me a second.
Yeah,
I mean, you're seeing a city being, for lack of a better description, wiped out in terms of leveled. I know it's precision attacks and all these kind of military terms that are being used, and they're giving warning and they're doing these warning shots, whatever. Like all of that, we can kind of play it out from the Western perspective.
yeah.
But the real thing is, it's like a city, part of Melbourne being destroyed, but being leveled. Are people there like comfortable with that or they're not thinking in that term? Is it like a act?
Listen, this is the
That's what
first
I'm
time
trying to
I've come
get
to
at.
Israel. Yeah,
Because
this is the first time I've
I'm
come
like
to Israel.
definitely many people in this country, particularly the Palestinian community, the Muslim community, Arabic community, even just any ordinary Australian. If we take away what happened, and you're seeing stuff like this, even regardless of any of that, you know, you can't accept some of what we're seeing today.
So listen, so whether Israelis see it, so what I'll tell you now is this is the first time I've come to Israel where I think the pity of Israelis to Palestinian has diminished because right now the entire country is in so much pain. Everybody knows somebody or that was directly affected by the attacks. 2000, I think, what is that? Close to 2000, or maybe 15, 1600. So it's coming up there. I don't know, it's still rising, and then still 200 hostages at least in Gaza. And in a country of 8 million and minus the 2 million Arab population. So you're like, if you compare that to in Australia, it would be like 10,000 people, or Australia, let's say it's 9, 7, yeah, it'd be like, just off the top of my head, I think, imagine in Australia, 10,000 Aussies or 8,000 Aussies were butchered in a day, and how Aussies would feel about let's say it was Indonesia, did an attack on us, and 8,000 Aussies died in a single day from terrorist attacks. You tell me how do you think the average Aussie would feel if they saw Australia leveling buildings or cities in Indonesia after September 11th, when the Twin Towers came down and they said that it was Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. How did Americans feel about the
Mm.
fact that they were leveling entire villages, killing
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands,
But I guess the
right?
argument then becomes about proportionality, right? That's the thing, proportionality. Because
Well, okay. So
you know,
let me ask you
like
let me
one
ask you this.
one is a very strong force, like the IDF, Israeli
Let
government backed
me
by the
ask you.
US,
Okay.
and then
So
you have
what do you
resistance
want?
fighters.
What do you want? The terrorist resistance fighters. Let me ask
I'm
you
just saying
this.
from that
What
from
do
that
you?
perspective.
Okay. So what do you want? What proportionality do you want Israel to do? Do you want Israel to send in? I think it was 3,000. You want Israel to send in 3,000 savages to rape, butcher, behead, um, light up homes and burn families alive, and go find a party in Gaza and just start. Is that proportionality? Because that's what they did. So do you want Israel to do the exact an eye for an eye? That's not the way it works. The way it works is this was orchestrated by Hamas. a terrorist organization that's still holding 200 hostages, civilian hostages, in Israel. Mostly civilians. There's a handful of military. The majority of the 200 people there now are hostages. They're still holding. So Israel's only way to do it is to hunt down Hamas as precisely as they can. That includes evacuating the entire north of Gaza, which is the footage you're seeing of the places they're leveling, because that is one of the most dense populations in the world. So if they had just gone in there and bombed it without warning anyone, you would see casualties in the hundreds of thousands. Hundreds of thousands, because you've got 2 million, I think the population is, in the entire Gaza. So if the population wasn't evacuated, you would actually. That's the thing. It's as hard as it is to say, and I sympathise with every victim of it. Remember, like when Israel tells them to move
The
south.
hardest part, the hardest thing I think for many of us is the children caught up in all of this, because
Absolutely,
you're getting a
absolutely.
lot. Like I can't show the videos on here, and I'm sure many people who are tuned in today have seen a lot of these videos. It's
Yeah.
horrendous. It's horrific. Like the kid. I mean, these kids don't know, right? I mean, they don't know. Like adults, maybe they're responsible for electing these people, all this kind of stuff, and maybe they can make a change, whatever. But the kids, they really are helpless in all of this. And
Rukshan, I am
this is the
100% with you. 100%.
yeah.
Now that we both agree that the killing of children is horrific, and I'm not posing this question at you.
Mm,
I'm posing this question at people that are making this argument in good faith.
yeah. What? Yeah.
Not the people that are using it as propaganda. The people that are putting it, are making it in good faith. Going, now, please explain to me, how does Israel protect its communities and its people from attacks like that? So the only way that I can see doing that is by finishing Hamas, taking out the terrorist organization, just like ISIS. When ISIS was doing that in southern Iraq, in Iraq and Syria, and that nobody had a problem with them, with the militaries coming in and bringing cities to rubble just to take out ISIS. So all I'm saying to you is, firstly, if anyone that's looking at this now, be consistent. So if you didn't have a problem about it before, ask yourself, why is it now you do have a problem? And I know why it is, because there's so much noise around it, because suddenly the entire world, Islamic world, and leftists, social justice warriors are
Mm.
out in force saying that this is the most horrific thing. So what I would say to you is, I agree. It is painful images to see. But how do you
What?
what can you do? What is the answer to putting an end to this
Look.
from for the Israelis, to the right to self-defense?
Look, this is what I've been seeing. Obviously, horrific, all of this stuff, and can't get into showing those videos. But the way that I see the Western response to this, particularly the US response, so we've had Biden there. I think Rishi Sunak is coming from the UK, and they are, in essence, green lighting. I think Biden's going to give an address today, this
Hmm.
ground invasion is going to go ahead. We're going to see a lot more of this type of civilian casualties. Now, I'm not talking about taking out terrorists and legitimate military actions. I'm not talking about that type of thing. But there's going to be a lot of people caught in the middle of this, whether they're human shields, whether they're there voluntarily, whether they're there involuntarily. It doesn't matter. I think people are going to get caught up in this, and I don't think people realize what's happening in terms of the West shutting off to some of this as well. Like the US maybe shutting off to this in the sense of green lighting what's about to go down in Gaza. And I know it sounds very morbid and it sounds horrific, but you being there as someone who's from Australia, Australian values, Australian journalist, is there something that you can do to minimize? I understand all the complexities around this, but is there something that people like yourself, people like me, others can do to minimize the civilian suffering in this? Because at the end of the day, that is the biggest issue here. Is yes, take out terrorists, whatever, but people are going to suffer. And the fact that I see the US greenlighting a lot of this, the fact that I think Biden's going to make that address today, greenlighting what's about to happen, uh, it frightens me in the sense of how bad it's actually going to get. And I don't think the world's actually prepared for it. Um, is there a way of
Look,
ensuring calmer heads prevail? Is there a way of minimizing all this, or is
But
it just a full?
I'm asking you the question again,
Yeah,
Rukshan, because everybody at home in the safety of their home of Australia can easily have an opinion on, well, the Israelis just need to live with the constant fear that
I'm
they're
not. I'm
going
not
to
saying. I'm
be.
not. Look, I
So,
accept even when our countries defend ourselves from terrorism. I accept that there is collateral damage. I accept there's these type of things which happen. We by living in these countries, by living in the peace and safety that we do live in Australia, we have to accept that at some point in our country's history, we have also engaged in these type of actions. Uh, even to all, even the West has been engaged in collective punishment and all
and
these type
and
of
and
things.
and, 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 and,
It's a
and
reality.
we've done it on behalf of others. Here you're talking about people fighting for their existence, and just to understand how much Israelis believe they're fighting for their existence once again, for their survival, is the fact that I think they called in the south they called 150 thousand reservists up, and 250 rocked up. That's how much everybody wants to just get behind it, because everybody feels nobody wants to go to war here.
Mm,
Nobody wants the war.
yeah.
Um, the thing is that if you stand, if you want it to end sooner, people need to stop being apologists for Hamas. To be fair, because the more that they feel like they have legit.
To put her into the ocean. I walk up to about my knees and.
That's just the video that started playing.
Sorry, so the more that people legitimize Hamas's cause, the more emboldened they become, and the less likely they are to release the hostages. All those people that are so angry about the bombardment, I haven't seen them calling for the releasing of hostages, or barely any of them. I think maybe Adam Band started with that and ended. But the majority of people that are talking about this don't even care about the hostages. They don't care. So why should Israelis listen to them? And the Israelis' first number one focus is security, peace and security and stability, knowing that they can go to their house and they're not going to, there's not going to be someone there waiting to attack them. Now, for this all to end, it just needs. It's not, I don't know what calmer heads. So I'm surprised they haven't gone until now. Like I feel like that is almost like the planning
Yes.
that's going into this. The planning that's going into this is calmer heads than a week ago. I'm surprised. I thought that this invasion was going to have happened already. I hope I hope it ends sooner rather than later. Like I hope this comes. I would love peace more than anything on this
Mm.
border and around the country, and I think that the average Palestinian will benefit from that as well. But I think the average Palestinian will also benefit from the end of Hamas. If Hamas is taken out, I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if that's strategically possible. But if there's a siren,
Mm.
there's a bomb. One second, there's a rocket. We'll just hope for the best that it's not going to hit here. But there's a rocket here. Now, there you go. Do you hear
Yeah,
that
I
one?
heard it. Yeah, I heard that one.
I can see it in the distance from me. So that's in this city. Right? So for Israelis, that's Israel. Like, I'm not even running to the bomb shelter anymore, right? But that's the constant reality Israelis live with. That, and that's not just now. That's been for 20 years, right? And they've accepted that. They've accepted to live with that till now. But what happened in all that period of time since they left Gaza in 2005, and since they've been copying those rockets, since what's happened, all that's happened since then is that they've built this ability, this military ability, the terrorist organization Hamas, and then they finally acted on it. So most Israelis, like, they were willing to put up with this crap. There's some screaming down there, so I don't know if it's a direct hit or whatever. But what I'm saying is, where's the line? The line for Israelis was last weekend, and if people can't put their themselves in the position of regular people just like you at home in Australia, who are living under this constant threat, and then such an horrific act happens to them or someone they know, like literally almost everyone. Last night I was conducting an interview in Jerusalem, and a guy walks up to me from the side, and he says to me, he goes, "Oh, I have a story for you," and then I start listening to him, and he was literally one of the kids, and he starts showing me the footage from him running away from the party at the Nova party, where he's just watching everyone get gunned down, and watched a police officer who just came to save him from saving the girl. It's like the most horrific events, and I think in Australia we wouldn't put up with what you just saw now, and we've been talking for I don't know, an hour, and that's happened, and that happens every hour. There's an explode. Like, we wouldn't put up with one of those. They've put up with it for 20 years, and now there's a red line where every Israeli's gone, nah, that's I'm not going to live with that constant threat. That's not the new threat. That's not the new threat we're allowing now. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying. It is scary times we're walking into. But until you can come up with a better solution that ensures, one, the safety and the security and the stability of Israelis, but also gives the Palestinians a chance, a path for peace. They live in Gaza. They chose this government, and I don't know if today they still want to live. I don't know. I'm not going to talk on their behalf. I hope there's a freaking revolution in Gaza where they kick out Hamas and they get people into power, that we can open the border. That Gaza border used to be open. My cousins used to live right there. They used to be friends with their Palestinian neighbors. It was just like a political thing at the time. So if they get rid of the terrorists and they're able to one day that path to peace come out. But this has set it all back, and I'm scared for what's to come. I'm scared for what's to come, for what's to come here, for Israelis, for what's to come for the Palestinians, and what's to come for Jews in Melbourne and Sydney.
Yeah.
I'm scared about all of that.
Yeah, I know. I'm aware of all of that as well, and I think you being someone who is, again, from Australia, and you kind of mix with everyone, and you see that from all aspects. I think people perhaps have an expectation of advocacy for the suffering of all, and I think that you might have to. Well, where the way things are going, definitely already the way that it's looking. We're heading into a situation where the humanitarian cost of this will be something that's going to be it's just hard to imagine what it's going to be. I don't know. I'm not an expert, or I don't have the words to understand what's going to happen, but you kind of feel that, and that's what I'm really worried about. And I hopefully this discussion today with you and a lot of the questions that people have had, maybe we've been able to answer some of them. I know not everyone's going to be happy. I'm already seeing in some of the comments that
The majority are not going to be happy.
Not everyone's happy with your answers, Ivy, and they're not happy with maybe the way I interviewed you. I don't know. Like, this is kind of that debate, and this has been ongoing for a long time. And I don't think people are going to be satisfied with exactly what's going to happen. It's always going to be unsatisfactory, or it's going to be a compromise in all of these type of things. But for us, at least, I believe we can be calm about it in some aspects. And we can try to rationalize things, and we can try to be empathetic and see things from multiple perspectives. And again, as always, I think the humanity of it all and the human suffering is universal. And just being aware of that, I think we can all do that and play our part as a community in general. I think that there's an important part to play in that. So,
look,
yeah,
I'm open to talking to anyone about any of it, and I'm not doing this episode for those that are just looking for confirmation bias, that just trying to find things because they already are locked into their belief for whatever reason. But I think that, yes, compromise on one level is always important, until there's a line that you can't compromise. And compromising with terrorism, you cannot, and you cannot expect anyone else to compromise with terrorism. the narrative that you hear about the Israeli or the Palestinian side, there is a lot up for debate. So it doesn't actually, it's kind of irrelevant, because one side will tell you that it's stolen land, the other side will explain to you why it's absolutely not stolen land. And so this is not a conflict about land. This is a conflict about ideology, and it goes far back, far more back than 75 years. So I would say, I hope when people look at my reports, they understand, yes, I am here to tell the other side of the story that has, as I predicted, was going to shift from the, oh my God, that is an unacceptable act, to Israel's this evil entity that just wants to kill innocent people. And that's why I came here. And you can take it or leave it, but watch my reports. I'm reporting actual real people on the streets, and on the front line. And I'm going to try get both sides as well. I am trying to get that without getting killed. like, that's the thing that I've got to navigate here. And I do want to hear other perspectives, but nobody yet, and I am pretty involved in this conversation, and I get to come from a different place where I have, like I've said, I've grown over years. I get to see different perspectives, and I can actually sympathize a lot more now. I actually sympathize a lot with the victims of suffering, but at the same time, I'm not going to be fooled by emotional arguments where you say, well, people need to just accept something that I'm not going to accept. And I
on that
wouldn't
note,
accept for Australia, and I wouldn't expect Australians to expect it. Rukshan, thanks so much for doing
thanks,
this,
Avi.
and
Thanks for your time. And
I hope
just
you don't get 100th of the hate that I get for my reporting on this
it's
one.
been
And
a
look,
continuous since COVID time, since knowing you, and then especially now. It's pretty extreme. I just want to comment on that. I can't imagine what it's like for yourself, mate. But even for me, just because I know you,
I'll be honest.
um,
I don't really. I expected it. I knew it. This happens every time anything happens with Israel, and it's so crazy that the people that are fighting for the so-called underdog, and they're calling us the child killer. That they're so vile in their messaging. They're so hateful in their message. It's so racially motivated. And I don't really read it. It's probably my wife that reads more of it, and she's shocked to the core by some of it. But um, I brace for it. I hate that I'm here having to do this. I wish that I was able to be in Australia. I wish I was able to be there to do that voice covering that we were doing. I wish that none of this was happening, but this is the reality, and I'm not going to bend my moral compass because it's more popular to stand with the Palestinian cause. It is more popular, and that's the thing. If you're sitting at home and you think you're edgy, or you think that you're on the wrong side of history, joining the mob, that's what you're doing. You're not actually, you're the underdog here from the perspective of the story is absolutely the Israelis and the Jews. And you can look at anyone, any platform, and you can just see it. It's everywhere. No other conflict is one group targeted more than no other conflict accepts such barbaric terrorism and then gets treated for responding this way. So no, I won't cower in my reporting. I'm not like you, I'm not only. This is not only because my family are from here and this is my culture, and this is about wrong and right. This is about good and evil. And on no, in no world am I going to stand and defend terrorism because they call themselves resistance fighters, because they have a certain narrative. There is two sides to this argument, to the broader argument of the 75 years that you discussed. And if you want to educate yourself on both sides of that argument. That's fine. But never ever will I lower my, change my my position on standing for what's right just because I'm going to get a lot of hate on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter or whatever. And that should demonstrate to you. You know what? If you're questioning, read my comments. Read the comments. Maybe not. I don't know which platform My wife's not deleting them, but even go read them as it happened. Read the comments on this video now, and you'll see the internal hate that there is for the Jewish state and for people just to exist.
Look,
No one talks like that about the
yeah.
Palestinians. No one does.
I feel like a part of it's frustration. I feel like a lot of people are frustrated with me, and I haven't particularly I mean, I'm not linked to this in any way, right? I haven't particularly taken a side. I've been very
But they target you just for your friendship with me,
no
Rukshan, and
friendship,
that's
but
the
also
thing.
no. I feel like there's a bit of targeting also because they say that you're sitting on the fence. How can you sit on the fence? But I truly believe to be an objective person looking at these type of issues, you have to be someone who can look at both sides of this story. I mean, I condemn the acts of terrorism, but I'm also someone that can equally condemn war crimes by the state. So I'm in that middle ground where I can condemn both very simply. I haven't justified one because of history. I don't have those
Yeah,
connections. I think people have to see it from that view as well. So that's where I'm coming from, and I do understand. Like people are going to say things, they're going to unfollow me. They're saying all sorts of things and all sorts of threats that I actually experienced some of these type of threats from the far left during COVID coverage, where they would threaten me and my business to not cover COVID and not do protests and all this kind of stuff. I've experienced all of this, and I don't really care about any of that. I'm very true to myself, as I feel like, whatever people may think of you, Avi, you're being true to yourself as well. And that's how it should be. And that's how these kind of things should be covered. And then there'll be other people who are presenting a different opinion. There's lots of people that you can follow that might be showing an opinion that you exactly agree with. But what is important for the public to understand in all of this is you have to consume all these different perspectives, all these different views, and find your own truth if you're looking for the truth. So we've lost Avi there, guys. I think his laptop batteries died. Avi, I'll
sorry,
let.
I've really got to run.
You go, man.
Thanks,
All good.
Rukshan. Thanks for Rukshan for doing that, and for those that are watching this, I don't know if you haven't seen, because I know we said they're not censoring, but that they're one of our videos already did get pulled down off Instagram because they said it was glorifying terrorism because it showed some of the Hamas footage, which is ironic. For being censored for showing the world what Hamas did under their glorifying terrorism community standards. So if you want to see this stuff, whether you agree or not, go to thetruthaboutthewar.com and watch it for yourself. Don't listen to people online who are bringing up 7 or 8-year-old videos, whatever it is, to try shoot the messenger. Love you, brother.
Thanks, Avi. Take care. All right, guys. So I'm just going to wrap up the show here. Just reading some of the comments. If and people asking for a balanced perspective. Look, if you know someone that wants to come on my podcast or one of my shows from the Palestinian community, I've been trying to reach out. It's been very kind of difficult in some aspects to find someone that's willing to come on and chat with us. But if you know someone, if you want to if you're watching this and you want to come on and share your perspective in your story, with me, like I am completely open to this. As I've mentioned throughout this particular broadcast, I am a typical Australian in the sense that I'm not connected to this in that same type of manner. So I'm looking at this from a different way. And one of the things which is getting lost in all of this is I think people are forgetting to connect with the Australian people in those kind of values. And I've been trying to stress that a lot because you sometimes lose the effectiveness of your message on either side. And I believe you truly have to bring it into the center and talk with people in language that they understand and in perspective that they understand. Because in this country, no matter what you may have experienced throughout history, and a lot of people, I keep talking about my people, you can go back to all types of history, thousands and thousands of years, all types of conflicts. In Australia, we are very fortunate and very lucky to be able to live and coexist with all types of different people despite those histories. And we have to understand it from that perspective. And I implore people who are watching this type of thing to get involved in that manner. And no, we're not going to solve any conflict by talking about these issues like this. We're not going to do anything like that. But maybe when we might lower the temperature within within our own Australian communities, we might make it easier and safer for people to coexist here when these kind of things are happening overseas. And of course, always it is important to raise awareness about the suffering of people, no matter where that suffering occurs, whether it's people as Israeli civilians, whether it's the civilian population of Gaza now who are under constant bombardment by forces of the West. Of course, the human suffering is immense, and it is so important that we continue to raise awareness of that. Anyway, guys, this is the end of this particular show of the Opposition podcast. If you've enjoyed, you can follow along at theopposition.show. I will see you all hopefully. This is on hold, obviously, but if we're doing another show, I'll put up a post. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.